Once again, this is Amy Burness. I'm on CyberArk's marketing team. I'm pleased to host this session today along with Ping Identity and SailPoint to talk to you about Zero Trust and how you can secure your digital transformation with identity. We are recording today's session as usual, so it will be available to you on demand. We email it using the address that you used for registration, so that usually takes just under a few business days. You should expect to receive that. We encourage your questions today. You can enter them into the Q&A box, which is typically displayed on the right-hand side of your screen. We're going to handle today's session a little bit different. We have 3 panelists which will be introduced shortly. And our session will be a moderated discussion, and we have asked David Mengs, SailPoint's Manager of Technology Alliance Marketing. He will host the session and manage the 3 panelists and make the introduction. So at this time, I will turn it over to him and we will get started.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everybody. So on behalf of CyberArk, Ping, and SailPoint, we welcome you to our Zero Trust Securing Your Digital Transformation with Identity webinar. Really appreciate everybody being here and taking time out of your busy schedule to attend. So as Amy had mentioned, we're going to do it a little bit different than a typical webinar presentation. We wanted to make this more of a dialogue. We've got some really amazing identity experts with us today. So what we wanted to do was to have more of a discussion amongst these panelists. And our topics really break down into 4 sections. So our identity experts will share their thoughts, ideas. We'll have a discussion on such topics as how we see the overall market, items such as digital transformation, moving to the cloud. Then we'll provide an overview of each panelist's respective focus area and area of expertise. We'll discuss an important element, of course, our integration of all of our solutions, what the value and benefits of that are inclusive of. And then finally, we'll get into a couple of use cases. And then we'll open it up for any additional questions that you, all of our attendees, have for the panelists. So with that, let's start with introductions from our panelists. We'll start from left to right. So Adam, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, David. Adam Bazian, EVP Global Business Development for CyberArk, longtime CyberArker, and really glad to be on the call with Richard and Joe and speaking about something that I think is near and dear to all of our hearts in terms of the whole identity approach for organizations.
Richard, you're up next.
Hi, guys. I was shifting around here. Richard Bird, I'm the Chief Customer Information Officer for Ping Identity. Not only do I have the good fortune of having had the experience of speaking with Adam and Joe a number of times over the years, I am a former corporate customer of both CyberArk and SailPoints. Worked in corporate for 20+ years and now work on the solution side. And I apologize in advance if I'm a little blurry. I actually just got off of a 20-hour flight and back from Australia about 30 minutes ago, but looking forward to this conversation.
And hi there, this is Joe Gottlieb. I lead strategy and business development for SailPoint. Thrilled to be a part of today's panel with 2 other great companies, CyberArk and Ping, and I suppose 2 great guys. Now, in all seriousness, we have had a chance of spending a fair amount of time together, and as you'll hear, there's a lot of passion surrounding what we do and how we come together to help customers in the industry tackle some very interesting challenges, the ones that I think are really helping to shape the future of security in business.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. All right, so I think a good place for us to start from a baseline standpoint for our discussion is looking at, I guess, what I'll call the state of the state. How do each of you see the overall market landscape and the market drivers that we're seeing within the industry? Joe, we're going to start here with you.
Well, thanks, David. Yeah, this is a really important thing to just set the context for, right? It's really important for all of us to know where we are on our journey and what's driving us to advance on that journey. It might be that your company is targeting or in the middle of a digital transformation project. Maybe you're looking to have more digital flexibility to enter new markets. Maybe you're reinventing the route to the customer to drive greater intimacy, customer intimacy, and greater lifetime value. Or maybe that digital transformation is more about operational efficiency. But regardless, if you're making a big move as a company, security and within that identity really wants to be part of the team. They want to be all about how, not know, right? They want to be able to enable the company to actually pursue these new domains with pace, but also with the confidence that comes with a good security and identity infrastructure. It may be that absent a particular driving function like a digital transformation project, you really are being proactive about security, and so that's a slightly different place to be on the journey. Or it could be that you've had an audit finding, or you're trying to increase your confidence in your audit reviews, and all of these set up a slightly different context for how you want to advance your agenda in identity. But regardless of the driver, we know that identity is playing an more important role in the precision of security and the way that we can reduce the risk of breaches in our enterprises today.
That's great, Joe, and this is Adam. And I think just building upon the comment that Joe made there at the end in terms of regardless of what the drivers are, right, whether it's that move to the cloud or adopting more automation or all of the agile approaches that are being leveraged, regardless of the driver, identity becomes much more critical to the conversation, and more specifically, I think identity security becomes much more critical to the conversation because there's now many more actors out there. There's many more things that need to be identified, managed, controlled, and reported on from a compliance perspective, whether that's the different types of users that we're now seeing in that DevOps environment, the developer folks that are doing a great deal of things in that environment, but also the CI/CD pipeline machines themselves. They have identities. They need to speak to each other. Those need to be managed. It's also the different types of targets that are existing out there in terms of the different types of devices that we're seeing, the range and number of targets being deployed up into the cloud, the container side. So the number and the diversity of the types of actors that are out there, both with heartbeats and those without, devices, machines, applications, really ends up being a critical element that needs a lot more attention, a lot more controls put in place proactively, a lot more of reviewing and reporting and analytics, to be able to do types of reactive types of things, and then finally being able to make sure that we're meeting all of the regulatory requirements out there. So the range of drivers that we see on the screen here really end up, communicating, or moving into the range of different types of actors out there, and the importance of making sure there's an identity control and an identity perspective being brought all the way through the life cycle.
All great points, Adam and Joe. I'll jump in here, and when we look at market drivers, I come from a bit of a different perspective. So in my background, I ran identity for large banks in the U.S., as well as having been a former CISO and a CIO. And I will say, going back a decade, identity was given short shrift amongst all security controls. It was considered to be an administrative function. I wish I could tell you that over the last decade that's universally changed. I know that there's been a lot of energy around identity as a core of security, but the move is not one that is fully adopted. So we still see identity stuck in infrastructure organizations and not in information security organizations. We're seeing those transitions, but as a part of the digital transformation palette, the problem that many companies are running into is because they had not addressed the security and control aspects of identity initially. It's making digital transformation harder. And it's certainly making customer experience challenges manifest as people are moving to customer access management. And we're seeing customer access management move from where it was formerly managed under CMO organizations as a marketing function, and now being seen as needing to be protected, and not even seen as needing to be protected, being mandated to be protected. And one of the things that's one of the most enjoyable parts of what I do now is I'm one of the few people in the world that gets to walk across all of the different compliance and regulatory regimes in the world. Like I said, just coming back from Australia after another series of conversations around CDR and open banking, working here in the United States, going next week to Washington, D.C. To talk about national data privacy initiatives. And as we're seeing this demand for the protecting of customer data, it's quickly being realized that you can't protect customer data without protecting identity. So we now have another manifestation of demand for digital transformation. So they all interlink, but we're just seeing substantially more pressure around providing customer access management, workforce partner, as well as the governance that ties those all together, and obviously the privileged access controls that are necessary to make sure that everything is locked down and secured.
Fantastic, thanks. Yeah, I think we're certainly seeing identity becoming more of a board level discussion, that's for sure. All right. As CyberArk, the leader in privilege security. So let's talk a little about managing privilege. How does privilege play a role within identity, and how has this changed throughout the years?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that I think has gotten a lot more awareness and understanding on, but there's still a lot more to be done. I think fundamentally, when we first really focused on that privilege space, 10+ years ago, it was about managing the access to those shared power accounts that were not tied to any specific individual. It wasn't an Adam or a Joe or a Richard account. It was a sysadmin account, a root user account, et cetera. And yet that account had, massive privileges. You are God on that system, and you have access to all of the data. So the first step is to be able to assert and identify who is accessing those types of accounts, and that's where CyberArk was able to be in the middle, start to manage those underlying credentials, the common piece that's across that shared account, and then only give that credential to people who have identified themselves to CyberArk through authenticating into the CyberArk environment, and certainly leveraging multi-factor authentication today, so that we really know that it is Adam or it is Joe or it is Richard acting as admin on that privileged account. I think that concept is well understood today and well accepted, and many people are moving forward with their deployments to manage the access to those privileged accounts and really make sure that they know good guys are accessing, bad guys aren't. I think that what has really started to evolve from there, though, is that concept of privileged accounts is no longer just in that IT data center context. That concept of power accounts to do things and manage that environment or that device is now certainly has been extended into the application space. Absolutely. When we look at the cloud, think of the most powerful account that may exist out there, which is the cloud access admin account and all of the power that's invested in that. And then extending that into the other areas where privilege is leveraged very often by the non-heartbeat users. I think that Richard's comment about there being more pressure on the identity part of the equation is 100% dead on, especially as people understand that there are, again, more of those actors out there that we need to consider. I'll give one example. I think part of that digital transformation journey for many organizations is automation, and that now I can have all of these things be automated, whether it's through robotic process automation for business processes or security orchestration and response for security or in the asset discovery side of automation. And yet when you pull back the camera a little bit, you have to start to realize I can get all those benefits, but all of those automation things need access to do their jobs. And if we don't start to put security around the things doing the automating, the robot, the orchestrator, the asset discovery, then we could be creating a much larger security challenge than the benefits we get from cost reduction and efficiency. So we know the privilege plays a role throughout the enterprise and across the estate, but now it's in many more areas of that environment, and it's no longer a conversation of putting the controls right around, just around your Windows estate or your Unix, Linux estate and your database. You need to bring privilege everywhere within the organization.
Oh, it's so true, Adam. You know, when we think about how, you know, you add the lens of governance on privileged access management, really starts to bring into focus what's required here. You know, in the past, privileged accounts were these shared accounts that you were afraid to mess with. You were afraid to change and add more security because you knew you needed to get to them, but you didn't have an automatable and policy-driven construct to manage and evolve those accounts. And so with Privileged Access Management System, we have much more determined, authenticated, and secured handling of those accounts. And then when you add governance, you now really have a complete system of record. You really can isolate which users have access to which accounts. You can make changes in that based upon the appropriate access as your roles evolve, as your user population evolves, as the targets that you're governing privileged access to continue to evolve, as Adam was mentioning. And so it's not just now users, as Adam was saying. If you now take that same context and you extend it to automatable machine identities and containers, in the limit, right, we're dealing with now a quantity of things that are changing that we have to manage systematically, and you just can't do that with very effective tools that allow you to master the population, get your head wrapped around its trajectory of change, and be in a position to be able to say to yourself, let alone your auditors, I'm on top of this. I have great visibility. I've narrowed my risk to areas that are acceptable, and I have manual controls in place to bridge those gaps. But I really am operating a policy-driven construct for privilege that satisfies my requirements.
All right, great, thank you. Let's shift gears a little bit as we continue to talk about our specific and unique focus areas and talk about MFA or multi-factor authentication. Richard, this one, of course, is for you. So for several years now, MFA has been on most CISO's short list as a must-have. I mean, we're definitely seeing it as a requirement from a security standpoint today. So how is the industry faring with MFA as access management continues to evolve the balancing act of delivering single sign-on convenience and imposing a more intelligent control point for access?
You know, it's a great question, and I don't, as I introduced myself, I don't come from a marketing or sales background. You know, I come from a run the engine background, and on its surface, I will tell you that, you know, MFA is now perceived in the marketplace relative to strong auth. It's perceived as the sports car by a CISO buyer or by a business buyer, and the downside is that everybody wants the sports car, and far too few companies are writing the check for it. We know this because we know that the uptake on MFA has only approached about the 30% mark. We still see a substantial amount of 2FA. And this is across all solution providers in the authentication market. And we still see an unbelievable number of companies, particularly in the customer space, that are protecting customer access entry with basically account and password and maybe something that they can do cheap, like reCAPTCHA, right? And we all are very, very clear in the security trades about what the weaknesses are of the first, the account and password, and then the 2FA, and then the MFA. We know where we currently stand in terms of its security capabilities, and it should be what we strive for. We're seeing a lot of energy around the adoption of MFA, but this is also one of those classic situations where technology is advancing much faster than business adoption. So I talk frequently on conference podiums about the reality that We're still trying to get people to close the gap for MFA. We know that it works. We know that it provides a safer landscape for all users, whether they be internal, external partners, or whatever. But we're already moving through what I like to call multivariate authentication, where we're pulling authenticatable attributes from massive amounts of data and being able to apply it to authentication calls at the individual user level for everything from, I like our CEO's reference to the Superman effect. You can't log in Dallas, Texas, and then all of a sudden have your traffic logging and rerouting to Korea. You can't be in two places at one time. The ability to be able to authenticate against those discrete elements now is available to us, and MFA is a leaping off point to be able to get there. So obviously our interest is in seeing greater uplift in the market, but right now about a third of the market is penetrated in large companies, much less percentage in mid-sized to small enterprises.
And Richard, I think that's an interesting, point that maybe some of us even in the vendor community didn't always understand, because MFA is so axiomatic as the best dollar spent per risk reduction for most organizations, just to help reduce the risk within the environment across the board. And we really do view it as an imperative that customers move in this direction and away from just that username and password and capture approach. It just provides so much additional security for an organization, really at not the massive impact dollar-wise or infrastructure-wise. Now that comment gets trebled, or even more, I don't know the right word for more than trebled, when you start to look at the privileged account side, right? Managing a privileged account proactively, rotating the credential and making sure the only place that it's known is through a privileged access security solution like CyberArk is absolutely a security, early step on. But if you're still fronting that with just the username and password, there is still that risk that it may be someone who knows Adam's credentials and is able to log in with their Windows username and password. So putting MFA in front of privileged accounts through the merging of functionality from things like Ping and CyberArk is really an amazingly effective and impactful step to help secure an organization proactively before bad things can happen out there. So the value that it delivers for an end user security within an environment, again, is really multiplied a great deal in putting it in front of a privileged account, which is why it's one of our core steps early in a hygiene process of not only understanding what you have and then managing the access to what you have, but putting MFA in front of that privileged access is really, recommendation 1.01 for organizations today.
All right, thanks. Let's move on. Of course, as we're talking about identity governance, that's right in SailPoint's wheelhouse for you, of course, Joe. So how does identity governance address the challenges that organizations are facing today with all the increasing regulations and security requirements?
Sure. So, if you think about identity governance, all the stuff that we're talking about represents a lot of change. And if you are, if you're in a company of any size with any level of complexity, and I'm sure you can all relate, then you know that managing change across that diversity of employees, contractors, partners, supply chain representatives, now machine identities, it's a lot. And it's actually, to channel Richard for a moment, it's crazy to me how there are still very large companies managing who has access to what manually or with spreadsheets or with some set of systems that are not well tied together and don't provide a unified view of who has access to what, how they're using that access, prompting for appropriate use, etc. And I like to think of identity governance as a process whereby an enterprise can continuously prune back. Think of a bonsai tree, right? Continuously manicuring the access to fit what is appropriate for the enterprise. As users change in their roles, as bots are spun up and spun down, as new processes are introduced, as new servers are introduced, new applications, right, new routes to market. All these things represent change vectors, and it's really critical that you have a system, A, that can see all the access, but then B, can surface ongoing decisions about appropriate access to the people that have the context to judge whether that access is appropriate. That is typically the supervisor of a user, be it an employee or someone who vouches for a business partner and is leading that partnering activity. It also will typically include, particularly for sensitive access, the resource owner, the individual or process whereby you want to make sure that the folks that are on top of that asset also are able to recertify, vouch for the access being appropriate. And so since these are the folks that have that context, we need to be able to make sure that they're part of that process. Now, the key is, in a large enterprise, doing that well, doing it proactively, takes time and work. It takes attention. And if you bury your head in the sand like an ostrich, you won't be tending to this. This is where machine learning and AI is going to be playing such a really, really important role, because it's allowing us to take all of that context of existing access and state of access and surface it in a form that is much more manageable for those people in the organization that need to make those choices. And so recommendations on whether or not that person should have access based upon other choices that have been made in the certification process, or choices made based upon whether or not that user is actually using that access, whether they've changed their role recently, et cetera. So these things are starting to advance the state of identity governance so it can do a much better job of keeping up with that continuous pruning process to make sure you're delivering on appropriate access.
Yeah, Joe, some really great points there that I really want to pull a thread on, because I get frustrated, again, given the past experience, I get frustrated in the identity governance space by, as you mentioned, the incredible number of enterprise-grade companies as well as mid-size companies that have not moved towards an identity governance solution, managing those activities manually. And look, I'm going to be really, really specific and very definitive here. It is impossible, I'm going to make that statement clearly, it is impossible for a large company to meet its regulatory and compliance demands in identity governance, managing it manually. I have been to over 400 companies in the last 3 years. All the work that I did prior to that, nobody can meet their compliance and regulatory obligations. We know this. Quarter-on-quarter audit results clearly show that you're not meeting those obligations for managing the critical components of access control. Are you who you say you are? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And do you have what you're supposed to have? Authentication, authorization, approval. Large chunks of that reside within the governance framework and structure to be managed by a solution. And when you don't meet those needs, the one thing that we've got to be cautious of at all times is compliance. Being compliant doesn't equal security. But one thing that's very interesting about the identity control segment is that it has been proven time and time again, evidence-based, that you can draw a bold red line between companies that have failed the governance components of their access audits, their compliance and regulatory assessments, and being breached by identity. There is a space where you can clearly show a tight coupling between the governance demands that are required under your regulatory compliance and audit schemes and your identity security controls effectiveness and performance. And in this case, there would be a massive uplift and improvement in companies across the world if they adopted a disciplined approach to identity governance. And you just can't do a disciplined approach to identity governance on spreadsheets.
Nice. Well, that's a good segue, I think, as we start to talk about our collective solutions, kind of bringing us all together, right? As we're combining CyberArk, Ping, and SailPoint, it's never been clearer that identity is foundational to this digital transformation and modern security approach, right? So what are the benefits and the value add of our combined solutions?
So I'll jump in there, David, and I really want to reflect back on something that Richard just said in terms of being able to, see the separation, or I think you used the word red line, between, organizations that have failed, and access audits, reviews or certification reviews, and those that have had identity breach. And I think that that's why this conversation that we're having today, the power of bringing access management and privileged access security and governance together is such a natural conversation that actually we've been talking about as a group and individually probably going on 3 or 4 years out there, because that is how you end up being able to make sure you're not having those gaps within the environment that can lead to bad things happening down the track. Just from the perspective of looking at, from a governance perspective, that you should be able to see all users, all accesses, all accounts within the environment. Yet, if you're not connecting with a privileged access security solution in the environment, then you do not have the visibility of all the accesses that, for instance, Adam has within the environment. You may not know that Adam is able to be Windows admin on these set of machines because of group inheritance in an area. You don't see that information, yet CyberArk knows that information. So by bringing that information up into the SailPoint identity governance space, and bringing the information of it really was, Adam, because we have the authentication information from Ping, allows now the customer to go and see and say, okay, I now see all of the area, all of the surface area that Adam has access to, not just his end user applications, but look, he has access as a privileged user to these 7 systems. And maybe more importantly, on these 3 systems, he has the ability to rotate a credential on that system. He has an entitlement that almost doesn't make sense in that privilege perspective. So let's make sure we understand what the real world looks like within the organization by connecting these solutions together, and then, based, reflecting back on what Joe said, be able to start to take some action on that and be able to start to prune back some of these things. Let's make sure that Adam is only having access to the systems that he should have access to, certainly, but let's make sure we roll back some of those entitlements and some of those capabilities that he has in that area. You can only do that when you start to bring together these 3 solutions within an environment. And then doing it with the market-leading types of organizations that we're talking about here, we're really reflecting back to the industry saying, you're now able to choose your best-of-breed security and identity team and know that these things work together. And we'll talk about the integration more in a following area, but the value is being able to see all users, all accesses, all accounts within that governance environment, and then make smart decisions that help you both be compliant but absolutely be more secure.
Adam, that's the direction that you've kind of mapped out relative to our partnership is spot on. I want to expand a little bit though to take in and incorporate some history. Look, CyberArk, Ping, and SailPoint. If you go take a look at our collective client base, where we are and have been for a number of years in those corporations, you will see a large number of some of the biggest, most successful companies in the world that have been using all 3 of us for years. And in our case, we've come to the point where we've realized that given our collective experience in the market, given our collective series and sets of integrations, whether they were done initially as configurations and ultimately as customizations, and then were codified into the necessary hooks and calls necessary for us to flow together real well. We've been doing this for a long time. We've seen it, and we've seen how to remediate the issues on the ground with our customers. The piece that's most important to me from the future state is relative to the notion of critical data. One of the things that I've been working on extensively across all of these different countries has been trying to drive home the realization that you cannot pass data protection laws without also passing a requirement for protecting identity. Because if you protect the data, but you do not protect the identity, all I have to do is be you to get your stuff, right? And that literally just explained almost every hack that's ever happened. I'm you, and and your stuff is mine, right? The need for structured, disciplined, well-run, strong identity control is dependent upon the building blocks of privileged access management, identity control, and IGA on identity governance. If you don't have those building blocks in place, you're going to continuously be exposed to that risk of somebody being somebody who they are not to get something that doesn't belong to them.
Yeah, just to throw a little more, my additional perspective on this to reinforce what's been said, but to maybe highlight the fact that we talk a lot about automation, but, you know, if you're coming off a spreadsheet, you don't need to automate as your first step. And in fact, we've been on, I think we're on our 5th generation of integrations between SailPoint and CyberArk. It's been more straightforward to integrate with Ping just because of the way that we share groups for a lot of what we do. But the fact of the matter is, the technology keeps advancing. That is not the challenge here. I think the point that I think everyone can resonate with is the fact that just grappling with this stuff as a unified approach, even if manual initially, will allow you to start prioritizing and retiring risk, feeling way more confident about audit. And then automation is triggered by an understanding of the problem space, right? We've always seen that. If you automate something you don't understand, you're going to run into trouble. As you really start to look at this and start leveraging whatever state the technology's in, but in fact you're talking across those organizational units. Remember, as Richard mentioned, a lot of enterprises still don't have identity inside security. So one of the biggest challenges is often making sure you're having the dialogue and the collaboration spanning whatever organizational structure that you have so that you can start grappling with this problem together as a team and working on it to the benefit of your enterprise. And then over time, for sure, you'll be able to see great opportunities for more advanced automation because you will have a better understanding of the problem and how you're prioritizing your retirement of risk in that context.
All right, thanks. I want to start bringing us to a landing soon, but just wanted to double-click into this a little bit. Can you expand on the importance of having these 3 combined solutions? We touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to click down and maybe look at some additional use cases on the benefit of combining all 3 of these identity governance, privileged access, and access management solutions. Richard, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in on this one first. Look, the reality here is that I've never met a CISO or CSO that ever said, I got hacked exactly the way that I expected to, right? Everybody on the planet that has ever suffered a breach got hacked in a blind spot. And blind spots manifest in the interchanges between solutions, whether they, be the manual transportation of information from one system to another, or it be manual checks and procedures. Without tight integration, you end up with those gaps, and bad actors seek those gaps out intentionally. Anybody that's ever lived through, an east-west type breach, or any type of situation where accounts and credentials weren't being monitored because they were assumed to be functional accounts or machine accounts and didn't rise to the level of scariness that a supposed insider has with excessive privileges, so we didn't even keep an eye on it. Those are the places where you get nailed. So the key here relative to the integration of these components is by integrating across privilege, across identity governance, and across access control, you are able to diminish those gaps and those blind spots. And, Joe used a great word. You're able to reduce risk or mitigate risks, and it is all about risk. So by encapsulating your organization with an identity control integrated suite of solutions, you drive out risk, and when you drive out risk, you create opportunities to go after those other gaps and those other spaces that need to be fixed, and you don't have to necessarily worry about those key integration points being your points of weakness anymore.
All right, thanks. Appreciate that. All right, so now let's talk a little about a couple of use cases. I think that'd be an interesting transition for us. So with the emergence of machine identity, we touched on this a couple of times. How are identities evolving from standard employees, users, to external users, customers, partners, contractors, even RPAs? Adam, let's start with you on this.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we were referring to earlier when I talked about the range of actors that have really changed within an environment, right? It's no longer just the IT admins inside my organization or the end users inside my organization that I need to be thinking and worrying about. It's that full range of users, both heartbeat and non-heartbeat, that we need to consider. From those external users, whether they be customers, partners, other vendors, et cetera, but all the way through to the automated side, or the machine side, where we need to make sure that robot has an identity asserted to it so we can uniquely identify that robot, or that automation piece, or that service account application, or whatever it might be. We can uniquely identify it, and now we can uniquely identify it. We can put a control in front of it, and now we can start to monitor what's happening, and now start to bring that information back up into that governance conversation that we've been talking about earlier, so that now you're able to look across the estate at all that's going on within the environment, whether we're talking about physical machines, whether we're talking about software robots, whether we're talking about containers, whether we're talking about CI/CD tools. It doesn't matter. We need to be able to look across all of those areas. And then just kind of reflecting back on what Richard was talking about from the integration, all the benefits that we talk about of having these solutions integrated and giving you that ability to do, better audit, better security, better pruning, as Joe mentioned. We also want to make sure these integrations are simple and easy to implement. And so all three of our companies have worked a lot to make these integrations simple, standards-based, and able to be deployed very quickly and easily, so that you can get those benefits of seeing, for instance, all of those applications in your environment that are using service accounts and what they have access to, and then go ahead and make decisions on, should ServiceNow have access to all of the machines out there for discovery, or only this set of 20 that really I want to make sure it's doing the deeper dive on. So needing to look at both sides of the equation, heartbeat and non-heartbeat, from that machine identity perspective, and then feeding that into that pipeline of information that can be leveraged to make smart audit and security decisions from your governance platform.
Yeah, I'd just add that I don't think we can stress this point enough, right? If our companies are feeling a little behind right now in the world of identity-based security, the coming wave of bots and RPAs, I don't want to make it about FUD. It's just a matter of the fact that the identities that we're going to be managing access for that are representing machines versus people is going to be orders of magnitude greater. So even if we're starting manually today and just getting our minds wrapped around process, defining process, think of the stages of maturity levels of an organization, right? Even if it's manual, we've got to get our minds wrapped around this so we can get to automation in time for these machine identities to be adequately controlled as they really start to impact our organization, right? We probably have a few Star Wars fans out there. If you can remember the parts of the saga where the bot armies rose up, that was transformational, right? The fact that you no longer had to be reliant upon training humans to wage war, right? And guess what? Enterprises have discovered the power of cloned bots to do things that are very fast and very profitable. And so there's going to be more and more of that. And so building our foundations to be able to apply and to serve these controls for the emergence of machine identity is really, really key. And frankly, it's an opportunity for all the folks, I think, in this industry to add even greater value to their enterprise security program.
All right, thanks. I always love a webinar that has a Star Wars analogy. All right, so let us bring us to a close with one of the overall themes of our webinar here around Zero Trust. So Zero Trust security is increasingly widespread, right? However you want to define it, the philosophy, strategy, posture, security architecture. So what role does identity and access management, the combination of all of our solutions, in the context of Zero Trust security, and how do your solutions either individually and collectively help enterprise adopt this Zero Trust model? So we'll use this as our closing slide, so I'll let each of the panelists provide some summary on this.
And I'll jump in first on this one. Tons of work going on industry-wide around Zero Trust, but there's a couple of things that we need to keep in perspective. First of all, Zero Trust in concept itself is not new. And many people go, yeah, well, it was stood up 10 years ago, as part of John Kinderbank's research. It goes beyond and much further back than that. If you've spent any time in mainframe security, you immediately understand that mainframe itself, at the OS as well as the mainframe application level, was built using a Zero Trust model. So it is a strong position to take within the security trades on how to frame a trust network, even though it's called Zero Trust. And here's where the interesting schism now has come within the broader security industry. Originally built as a security framework around networks, and then, as everyone knows, in the last year or so, a very strong position taken by Google with BeyondCorp. And in the space of the BeyondCorp conversations rose this notion of the application of the Zero Trust strategy to identity. And identity then has gravitated to be a key component of an overall Zero Trust strategy. The reason is because at some point, particularly in the application space, and definitely in the cloud app space, at some point, trust has to be invested in a user. You cannot continuously apply the notion of Zero Trust in session to a user, because the amount of overhead in the application space would basically destroy your business, or at the very least get you terminated for applying that much overhead. So the reality is now Zero Trust as a deployment strategy for security itself is becoming more and more dependent upon these same key ingredients. Another reason why we're working together so closely as partners. So dependent upon governance, so dependent upon privileged access control, and on identity control itself and strong authentication, that it's really becoming the root of a solid Zero Trust corporate strategy for security, and is additive to a broader spectrum of Zero Trust capabilities. But we've seen these moves, and we're addressing them collectively as an industry and individually as solution providers.
Yeah, this has been a fun topic to see resurge in terms of the industry dialogue, right? And so much of the dialogue is around, oh gosh, is this old? Does this still apply? How does it apply anew, et cetera? If I had my way, I would append I'd insert a word, and Zero Trust is really about zero blind trust, right? It's about not taking on faith something you shouldn't take on faith, and therefore investing in better context that will lead you to a place where you can make things more trustworthy because you're putting in greater controls that have better insight, better intelligence. And so that, to me, sets up a great opportunity for how we apply more identity-specific security. One of the things that the three of us enjoy, we all sit on the board of the Identity Defined Security Alliance, and we've used the Zero Trust theme as a way to really drive a lot of discussion and ongoing integration and thoughts about how the industry can evolve to help enterprises do a better job with identity-defined security. And so the things that I think of are things like, well, you should no longer be trusting the fact that access given in the past is the appropriate access today. You should no longer trust that user based upon a password alone. You should no longer trust your discipline for sharing passwords. That should be vaulted and should be brought under greater controls with privileged access management. You should no longer trust the group structure that is a result of years and years of bloat and administration gone wild, gone amok. These are things that you want to be able to sink your teeth into and start to invest in greater context, greater understanding, so you can drive more trustworthy situations and have a better security posture and reduce risk. So it's a fantastic concept to be able to apply in an ongoing fashion in the evolution of your security program.
So I can't really add a lot to what Richard and Joe both said, except to say, here we've talked all through this presentation about the value of bringing access management, privilege, access security, and identity governance together, and started with the word zero trust and ended with the word zero trust. We talked about all the values that accrue in the middle. And the reason that you're finding our organizations working together to not only bring the solutions together, but to make it simple and easy to connect those, is that by doing so, you end up creating that platform, that foundation that can support your zero trust type of initiative within the organization. So instead of starting from zero trust and saying, what do I need to go purchase and what do I need to go pull together, you can work with what you already have within your environment, knit them together, and start along your journey to that full zero trust approach. That's the whole idea, I think, of what we're doing together, and we're seeing it with our customers as well. So been a great conversation, but it's really more, I think, kind of directional to the folks in the audience saying, you know, start to knit these things together. Start on some simple use cases. Start with the first step, and you're going to get benefits in that first step and then benefits from that second step as you go along that full journey that ultimately gets you to that zero trust approach.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Great information, great dialogue, as we knew it would be. We're just about to the top of the hour, and we've had a number of questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of them. We're just about finished. But I did want to just allow for one question as we close out, and it's an interesting one. It was sort of a long question and broken into a couple of areas, but I'll sort of summarize. The point was that we are seeing significant spend across security by chief information security officers, and the net of the question is what's going to turn the tide for us with all this spend and all this need and all these challenges and these ongoing security challenges that we see? What's going to turn the tide for organizations today?
So
I'll take a crack at it. This is Joe. I think you know, security spend has been going up for years and years and years, and part of what has driven that is the advancing threat landscape, right? So that we don't see any signs of that abating, but I think what we've seen over the years is just an increased importance to build security in to our information technology systems. And so while we still have a ways to go there, that's been an ongoing trend. And so you tend to see a better design of security into new applications, new SaaS facilities, new infrastructure as a service, containerization. The CI/CD pipeline, you might argue, is maybe overrunning that a little bit today because there's so much new activity going on there, and it's not always designing security in, but that's an opportunity for us, right? I think that continues to be the ongoing effort of security practitioners to use those dollars more effectively and yet maintain that role in their organizations to be the department of how, not the department of no. So while I don't necessarily see a sudden mesa where we no longer have to invest more in security, I do see an increased return. And I think ML and AI, you know, and artificial intelligence is a great wide hope for lots of technologies. I think it makes the stuff more understandable and more automatable, and that's gonna help all of us with our respective efforts in this area.
I'd just like to add real quick on that, Joe, is I think that we we have certainly been moving from a reactive security approach to proactive, and most organizations are choosing and deploying security technologies and identity technologies proactively and getting value A from product A and getting value B from product B. But I think that what we're really starting to see take hold and what may help us turn that tide a little bit is rather than looking for the next solution to solve the next version of the problem that's seen out there, start to connect products A and products B together to get value C through N or whatever that might be. Start to leverage your existing assets, your existing investments by connecting them, as we're recommending in this conversation today, with access management, privilege, and governance, and you get many additional benefits that come from that connection before you have to go spend, next dollar on new technology. Connect what you have, get more value out of it. It's really what we talk about at CyberArk from a security as a team game perspective. Get more value out of what you have by connecting them, and I think that's really what we've been talking about all this afternoon.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that, just real quick, I think I'm fascinated by the underutilization of existing solutions and the lack of usage of all of the capabilities that are inherent within those solutions. I'd agree with you. Look how to optimize the solutions you have in place. Again, in our case, the ability to integrate at the level that we're currently integrating with each other is a starting point if you have those solutions. But use what you got. It's the best way to get started.
Right.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Well, I want to thank our panelists, Adam, Richard, Joe. Fantastic. Appreciate all the great insights. Thank you to all of our attendees, and have a great rest of your day.